Great. So hello, everyone. My name is Eleanor Hunter, and I'm one of the members of the Oak Lodge Governance Project Steering Committee. And I will be your host for today's presentation by John Southgate, talking about Oak Lodge, the economic potentials. I can't even remember the exact title of it. John, what was the exact title of yours? Yeah, something like that. Economic possibilities for the Oak Lodge area. People will be joining us throughout this presentation, but for those of you who are here now, you'll see in the chat that there is the address to sign up on our MailChimp account if you haven't already done that. And John has let me know that he is interested in, he's willing to be and interested in being interrupted, politely, of course, during his presentation. So what I'll ask you to do is, if you know where the reaction buttons are by now, raise your hand and I'll call on you and we'll work through those different questions during the time. And I'm sure that John has set it up so that there'll be time at the end for general Q&A. So John Southgate comes to us. He's done all sorts of illustrious things, working in all sorts of different places, is very experienced and knowledgeable about this particular area, and is going to speak to us today about the Oak Lodge, the economic possibilities for Oak Lodge. So take it away, John.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to, John, before you get going, I'm going to ask Chips, it has a formal introduction to do of you, and I'm going to let him do that because he knows you well. Go ahead,
my bad.
Chips.
Go for it.
Yes, am I?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Eleanor. It is a pleasure because I have known John for a few years. And John has a great deal of experience in this area of economic development and of planning in many areas. He has worked for the city of Portland. He's worked for the planning department. He's worked for it for years and did some really extraordinary things. One of the things that he did that I know about is he staffed the Historic Landmark Commission. And that's sort of simple. John likes to bring people together, diverse people together for projects. He has worked for an extensive group and extensive kinds of clients from areas like Hillsborough, where they were concentrated on significant economic development, to an area such as the community of Lentz, where his focus was how to incorporate equity into economic development. John has very diverse experience in doing things such as that. He specializes also in, and has in the past, in bringing small businesses into economic projects so that they can all function well. Some are startups and some are businesses that he has found ways that he can incorporate them together and these folks can work together. It's interesting to hear a whole list of things that he's done because it's very extensive. I'm going to let him talk about some of the things that he's done and what he sees about our community. One of the interesting things is that even though John has worked all across the state of Oregon, from Astoria to Gladstone and many other areas, he's very familiar with our community, and he's very familiar with the challenges that we have in front of us, such as on McLaughlin Boulevard. And he has been involved previously working for economic development in that area. There's a few other things, though, that you should know about John when you're listening to him. One, for those of you who are interested, John was a middle child, and this might explain some of the things, some of his interests. When he decided to go into the world of economic planning and development, unfortunately, the music world might have lost a significant participant because John is a gifted pianist, and he's a classical pianist with an extensive repertoire. And if anybody has an opportunity to hear him play, you should take advantage of it. He also, during his earlier years, he spent a lot of time on the West Coast, where he was often confused for Cary Grant. I know that his daughters have told me that. And I know one of the highlights of his career was when he was elected secretary treasurer of the Bridal Mile School in the 6th grade. He says it's been downhill ever since. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, with great pleasure, John Southgate.
Thank you, Chips. That was the best introduction I've ever gotten, especially the Cary Grant thing. And I'll just say that it's really a curse, these looks, but I bear with it. So seriously, thank you very much to all of you for this opportunity. I am very interested. I have some knowledge, not as well as you do. This is your home. This is your community. So I certainly don't know as much as you do, but I have had the pleasure of working certainly with Chips and Eleanor. I've gotten to know Thelma a little bit, others on the Valerie, certainly, as well as people who aren't here today, like Joseph. It's a great community. I love the Skidmore Fountain in Old Town. Good citizens are the riches of a city. And so I guess the only thing missing in that picture is you need to be a city, but maybe that's for a little bit later in the discussion. What I would like to, first of all, just a couple of logistical ground rules. First of all, I apologize. I know I look like a nerd with this phone, but I have, my laptop has, the sound quality is dubious at times. So I hope you'll bear with me and I don't distract you too much with this little contraption. The other thing is I'm actually currently under contract with Clackamas County, and I'll probably talk about that a little bit later. But I wanted to make it clear, the opinions that I share today are mine and not the county's. And I'm sure that there may be things I say that not everybody who works for or serves as an elected official of Clackamas County would agree with what I'm going to say. So just that I really need to make that disclaimer. Hopefully they would agree with most of what I say and would respect even where we disagree. I miss Voltaire. I disagree with what you say, but I defend to the death your right to say it. So what I'd like to do, first of all, as Eleanor said, I'm very comfortable with interruption. And this is a small enough group, so yes, please raise your hand or put a message there, and Eleanor will call on you, because I don't want to say things that are not clear, but then 20 minutes later you forget it. So do feel free to jump in. So what I'd like to do is talk about economic development, sort of the field of economic development, and then try to apply it to your community. I have been in the world of planning and economic development for 40 years in the Portland region and beyond, like Chip said. And so I'm just going to jump in. I'm probably going to state the obvious. If I had to define economic development, there's not an official dictionary definition, but it's about creating wealth, creating prosperity in a community, helping small business, helping create more jobs, providing a good education so that people have options with their career path, so they could afford the home they want to live in and provide an education if they have children. That's kind of simplistic, but really economic development, as I was telling Chips recently, it's not rocket science. It's kind of basic. How can either government or a chamber of commerce, or I see Suzanne, the Oaks Grove HDOG, how can we help businesses be more successful? That's what it really boils down to. In my view, and in my experience, you could divide economic development into two broad categories. And as you'll hear me say, there's an overlap, but there's sort of the traditional business recruitment and retention and expansion, helping a business locate, whether it's a small startup, an entrepreneur, or attracting intel. We're going to talk about intel a little bit later, since I worked in Hillsborough for several years. There's a new R in BRRE. It's recovery. With what's going on this past year and a half with the pandemic, a lot of the county's attention, a lot of my work has been, how can we help businesses that are struggling get back on their feet and thrive? And yes, Eleanor.
What is BRRE?
Yes, I'm going to use acronyms, and I'm glad you interrupted me, because we all do that in our little worlds. Business recovery, business recruitment, recovery, and expansion. So most ECDev people, that's our big acronym. And as I said, there's now another R. I'd say business recruitment, retention, recovery, and expansion. So that's that's one of the two silos of economic development. The other one, you could use different terms. I'll use revitalization or Main Street, again, pointing out to Suzanne, where it's not so much about the businesses that you're trying to attract or help be successful, not directly. It's really about placemaking. So, and a lot of my work has been in the area of revitalization. I had the pleasure of working in the Pearl District in Portland years ago. I worked in Interstate, I worked in Lentz, I worked in downtown Hillsborough. I'm working right now in Astoria, helping to create a place. There's an intersection between business recruitment, retention, expansion, and revitalization, because if I have a business and I'm thinking of locating, say, in Gladstone or in Oak Grove, um, I want to attract talent. To attract talent, I need to create a place that draws people. So I'll give an example. A great example is Beaverton. I don't know the last time you were out in Beaverton. Again, as a lifelong resident of this region, Beaverton didn't have such a great reputation, and it still has work to do, but it's amazing what they've done in the last 15 years, specifically with urban renewal. They have restaurants, they have mixed use development, they have the new art center that's going to open, I think, this fall. Beaverton's made a conscious decision to make their downtown a bigger draw for people to walk, to mill about, to get food, to watch the outdoor films in the park, that sort of thing. Because they want Nike employees, as an example, to go to downtown Beaverton. Don't go to Northwest 23rd Avenue or downtown Portland. Come to Beaverton. We'll have the brew pubs and the cool restaurants and all that kind of thing. So again, if I'm trying, the old-fashioned attracting businesses ties into revitalization, because a cool downtown is, or Main Street or McLaughlin is part of the draw to attracting new business investment. Okay, so this is going to be just a series of observations, so sort of stream of consciousness. So hopefully it'll all tie together to some degree. The next big thing I really want to say is that I think economic development, the primary role of government in economic development, is to set the table and then get out of the way. And what I mean by that is setting the table is, is there infrastructure? Is there workforce, a talent pipeline? Are there reasonable zoning regulations fairly applied? Are the fees within reason, fees for development? All those things that a business needs to look at. What are the incentives, and are they reasonable? You don't want to give away the farm, but sometimes you need to provide a tax abatement for certain kinds of investments to compete with other jurisdictions. So that's setting the table, and then getting out of the way. Let business come in. I should say too, part of setting the table is establishing a vision, working with folks like you, creating a vision that says, here's what we want this area to look like. Beaverton has a great vision for their downtown, and it's a long-term thing. Beaverton is not going to turn around in 2 years. It's going to be a long-term thing. The art center, the Beaver Creek is this beautiful little waterway that courses through parts of downtown, helping attract mixed-use development that's pedestrian friendly and activities. They have a beautiful new library. So there's a vision, and I know that we're going to talk about this in a moment about McLaughlin and the vision there. But the point is, establish that vision, and then make sure that your infrastructure investment aligns with that. Do you have transit, for instance? Is McLaughlin a pleasant street to walk on? Are the zoning regulations aligned with that? If your vision in downtown Beaverton is we want to have mixed use development, but we're not going to allow buildings more than 2 stories high, well, that's going to be a problem. You're not that kind of the development that you aspire to won't pencil. So there's alignment is a word I want to really focus on. Get a vision, and I think you do with the map. My impression.
What's map? What's map?
You're not going to let me use acronyms. I could see that. The McLaughlin Area Plan, which I gather now is like 10 or 12 years old. For all I know, it needs a refresh, but my sense is that in very broad brushstrokes, it enjoys support from a lot of folks in the community. People probably in this call were involved in the creation of it. But then when I say get out of the way, in my world of economic development, we have temptation to be attracted to the shiny new object. And I'll give an example of that. Um, uh, when I was working for Hillsborough, and no credit to me, I had nothing to do with this, but Solar World came to Hillsborough, and at the time they were quickly the largest solar panel manufacturer, literally in the Western Hemisphere. Well, so what did we do? Let's go try to attract more solar investment. So we went to trade shows in Germany, and we went to San Francisco, the annual blah 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 conference. We spent a lot of money, probably tens of thousands, maybe six figures, trying to get another solar investment. We never got one, and I guess the message there is economic development, we tend to go after the fad of the moment rather than focus on what is the vision and make sure our investments and our policies, our regulations, our incentives support that vision. Let me stop there for a second, Eleanor, and see if is what I'm saying make general sense, and please interrupt and say, Southgate, when you say X, I don't understand what you're talking about. So I'll stop there for a minute if anyone wants to jump in with a question.
Sounds all right to me. I don't see anybody's hand going up or anything like that. So thanks for the check-in, but makes sense to me.
Okay.
We're good. Okay.
Okay, good. I'll keep going then.
Lovely. Thanks, John.
So I thought a lot about these remarks today, so I'm going to read a little bit. I hate to read in presentations, but bear with me. I think McLaughlin Quarter, I'm probably stating the absolute obvious to all of you. It is clearly your economic engine. Most of the Oak Grove area, needless to say, is single family zone on either side of McLaughlin, either between McLaughlin River or on the uphill side, which is fine. That's the reality. McLaughlin is your focus. And so I'm going to read what I said. I have given McLaughlin much thought. I have happily heard county leadership consistently identify the renewal and vibrancy of the McLaughlin Quarter as a high priority. Today, it supports many small businesses, and of course, it serves as a major regional transportation artery. But I think McLaughlin has the opportunity and the promise to be so much more than what it is today. It is not my place to impose what I think the street should be. And I know you already have a vision, the McLaughlin area plan map. And again, my impression is that it enjoys, in general terms, enjoys support from all corners. If I were your economic development director, if you had a city and you hired me to be your economic development director, and I'm not applying for the job, I would start with that plan. I would road test it broadly. I'd talk to business owners, property owners. I'd talk to you all. I'd talk to neighborhood associations, the CPO. I'd talk to Oak Grove, to HDOG, Historic Downtown Oak Grove. I'd talk to everyone who could say, all right, this is the vision. Do you agree? And right now I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, would we convene formal discussion groups or just an informal thing or some combination? But I'd want to make sure, all right, I'm reporting to my city council, and a year after I've hired, all right, I've spent the last year I've talked to Eleanor Hunter, I've talked to a lot of people, and there's support for this, but here's a couple of things that have changed since that plan was completed that need a refresh. I can't imagine it doesn't need some kind of refresh. I don't know a plan that doesn't need a refresh every once in a while. So, and then I would go about implementing the economic development aspects of that plan. I know the plan speaks to a lot of things, not just to economic development, but that's where I would focus. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna go back to reading a little bit. So again, I don't want to speak out of turn in laying out what I think should happen on McLaughlin. That's for you to decide, not me. I certainly have my opinions, but I will simply observe this. I think my friends at the county, good, hardworking people that I know there, would acknowledge that counties are not terribly well suited to oversee this kind of work, to oversee the long-term sustained economic vision and implementation. I'll give the example of Intel. Intel, I think, first came to Hillsborough. They came to Aloha back in the 70s. I think their first Hillsborough presence is starting to get close to 40 years. I'll call it 35 years. I'd say the city of Hillsborough, for very good reasons, has devoted probably tens of thousands of staff hours to that Intel relationship. That's a lot of money to pay all those staff all those years. But Intel has invested, I will say conservatively, $30 billion and created literally tens of thousands of jobs, not to include all the indirect jobs of the suppliers and even, you know, the guy, the barber shop, you know. Intel is the economic engine. It's the largest private employer in the state. It has a statewide significance, but certainly Hillsborough. They have had that, the city of Hillsborough has had sustained engagement with Intel to help attract their further investment. And it's been incredibly successful. And a county is not set up for that kind of relationship. And so for McLaughlin to become what it could be, just as an economic engine, forget about its other roles as a transportation corridor and all the other important things it does, but as an economic engine, until and if there's a city through which McLaughlin passes, I think it's going to be challenged. And this is not a criticism. I know some of the people I've worked with on the McLaughlin Quarter who work for the county, I won't name names because then I'll leave out somebody and their feelings will be hurt. But I know some people who are just really good. But I was talking one the other day who acknowledged that the county can't provide the services. I talked about some of the zoning challenges along McLaughlin, and I think, and I'm aware of some of the tension in those discussions. And I think that there are some solutions where they require nuance. The county zoning office is not in a position to say, all right, we're going to treat McLaughlin as a one-off and have this really complex little set of exceptions to how we treat, for instance, non-conforming uses, as an example, because they'd have to do it for everybody. A city has that luxury. When I was in Hillsborough, we set up a new downtown overlay zone, and now I'm getting into the weeds of my profession, so bear with me. But we knew we wanted the commercial zones in downtown Hillsborough had to be different from just a generic general commercial zone out on TV Highway on Cornell Road, because we want to do special things in downtown Hillsborough, historic core of the city. Well, we could do that. We set up a special overlay zone that only affected the downtown commercial zone, not all commercial zones. I just don't think the county is able to do that without really devoting a lot of staff that they don't have. Likewise, that's the regulatory side. Urban renewal. I know urban renewal is controversial, and I'm not here to sell urban renewal, but if this new city is formed, and if the city council says, gosh, let's take a look at urban renewal, that's a question the city can grapple with much more easily than the county. My understanding is the county, to form an urban, if everyone said, let's form an urban renewal district to help sustain existing businesses and promote new business investment along McLaughlin, and I could explain how that would work. But let's say that there's broad concurrence. Now you have to have a vote, I believe, of all the voters in Clackamas County, or at least in unincorporated Clackamas County. Well, if you form a city, Milwaukee or Happy Valley or Oregon City, or even little Estacada. Estacada has its own urban renewal district. They're able to do that independent of the county. Now they have to confer with the county. Any taxing jurisdiction will be impacted by an urban renewal district, but it's up to the city. They need to be respectful of their taxing partners and confer with them. But that's an Estacada decision, not a county decision. As with Oak Grove, if Oak Grove were a city, and I'm not, I don't want to sound like I'm selling urban renewal. There are things about urban renewal that you need to pay attention to be sure. But if you even wanted to consider that route, it's going to be monumentally easier to have that conversation if you're your own city. Again, Estacada has 3,500 people. They did it. Eleanor, you have a question or thought?
I just want to make sure, Tom Civiletti, I saw you sort of raise your hand. Did you have a question that you wanted to ask, or? You're muted, love.
I think I was scratching.
You're just, my bad.
I think.
Hang on, Ed Riddle has a question.
I was wondering, like in terms of Oak Grove becoming a city, where would it be? One of the questions is that what it seems to be right now is a series of strip malls over a long corridor, separating two sides of groups of people. And it's hard to envision a place that you would go and have places that you would walk around in to help support business development. So one of the questions I have is, where would it actually be in terms of a center that would have those amenities?
Well, I could opine, but I don't know if Eleanor or Valerie, someone wants to, because you will decide where that city is. I have my thoughts on where I would focus that more concentrated pedestrian activity, but Eleanor, do you want to jump in or?
At this point, there's no intention or plan for anything to become a city. The purpose of the research study that the Oak Lodge Governance Project is doing is to provide information and find out what the options are and what the different pieces would be. So if anything moves forward, that's farther down the line. What the purpose of this particular information session is to understand more about the economic development part. And I think, Edward, in trying to answer your question, it's that idea of what I'm hearing John say, and help me, John, if I'm doing this incorrectly, is that what are the various pieces that have to come together in terms of the zoning, in terms of the economic development, in terms of the different pieces that would make something viable. And so where the boundaries of something are, if that ever happens, is completely up to the people who live there and what the individuals who live there want to have happen. What I'm hearing John describe is how things would be different and easier for economic development if there was a smaller area that only the people in that area had the choices about. And I see Valerie's hand up as well. Valerie?
But to finish my
Sure.
thought, what we have now is a huge investment in essentially a linear strip mall community. And so I think one of the major problems with creating a city that has this kind of a center is how would you approach restructuring such a thing to create a city kind of an environment that would attract people and including brick and mortar businesses and things like that. See, like I find that's like a real hard one to wrap my wits around. How you'd actually go about doing that. And I think that's a key piece of the puzzle.
Great, thanks, Edward.
I'll take a whack at that, but Valerie, did you want to say something before I do?
I was just going to throw in the McLaughlin area plan, there's a concept of multiple activity clusters, nodes going down McLaughlin. So that was the model that was used when MAP was put together. So I don't know how that fits in. It's like multiple centers, but I just thought I'd throw that in.
Well, so, and yes, even if well, I agree with that concept. So is it Ed? What I would do is, again, I'm a little reluctant to throw out my ideas because this is your community, not mine. But if I were the ECDEV person, what I would be looking at, I'll throw out one kind of radical idea, and this is something that my friends at the county might say, "Oh, John, why'd you say that?" But there's something called jurisdictional transfer. So you may know McLaughlin is a state right-of-way. It is controlled by ODOT. 82nd Avenue in Portland, I think from the county line up to the airport, has just been transferred from the state of Oregon, from ODOT, to the city of Portland. And if I were the city of Oak Grove, I would actually take a look at that. Now, that is a complicated thing and it's a costly thing. If you take on that right away, you're going to have to pay for it. So typically when there's a jurisdictional transfer, it comes with money. ODOT says you have the right of way and we're going to write a big check to cover, the next X years of maintaining this right of way. But that's one observation. That's sort of a policy thing, and that's a radical thought. But one of my frustrations, I have friends at ODOT, but one of my frustrations with ODOT is they don't like trees. And this is kind of a simple thing, but it generally, you go down McLaughlin, outside of Milwaukee, it's, the trees are set on the inboard side of the sidewalk. Trees, have a wonderful aesthetic benefit and a climate benefit, but also they're just protective. If I'm walking down the sidewalk and it's me and a curb and then cars going 45 miles an hour, I'm kind of nervous. If there's a tree, I think there's a psychological benefit. So that's one of the things, is just making the street a more attractive place. And then I'd look at, as Valerie said, I would look at the nodes, so at the main cross streets, so whether it's Concord or Oak Grove Boulevard or whatever, and look at, you're not going to make McLaughlin the Champs-Élysées, in the next few years, but you could start looking at these station areas. And I would look at transit, and I don't want to oversell transit. I know that could be controversial in some circles, but I've seen transit investment as a driver of, I'll call it urban quality. And so, I mean, working in interstate, it was kind of controversial. So you have to work closely with the businesses to make sure the businesses aren't harmed by that investment. And we did a lot of things in interstate to protect the existing businesses. But at the same time, you know, that transit investment and the urban design that comes with it, you know, ideally wider sidewalks and bike paths and attractive lighting and trees and all that. You know, I don't think that aesthetics saves an area, but I think it gives a toehold to more walkable, attractive environment. Ed, does that get at it, or and do you agree, or? Oh, Ed, you're muted.
I was involved in map discussions years ago, and the nodes seemed like the right kind of thing. Can you hear me? Am I okay? And I was really disappointed when one of the primary nodes became the home of a giant storage building, which does not have, you know, any attractiveness for being a public place, you know. And it was kind of at the core of the whole idea of having a node at you know, Oak Grove Boulevard in McLaughlin area, where that would be like a civic center. I mean, you could see it. There was a lot of economic activity going there. It seemed like an ideal place, and yet what actually occurred was a giant storage building that seemed to wipe out the possibility of having it develop that way. So even though we have these ideas about having these nodes, it's really hard to bring them into life, you know, into actually manifesting them.
Yeah, and I'll go back to my point. You have more local control if you have your own city. So those sort of zoning things, you could say in these in this particular mode, again, the county has to say it's general commercial. I think it's the C3 zone. If it allows mini storage, if it allows whatever, it's allowed. If you have a city, you could say it's a C3 zone or it's equal in your new city. But in these particular areas, we're going to have more nuanced regulation that maybe precludes certain uses that might be allowed in other stretches of that zone. So it's, you know, I don't want to jump too much into what you should do with your community. That's, again, it's not my place to say, but I do think, and I don't want to oversell the city. I just think that I know from experience, from 40 years of experience, I've watched this in Multnomah County and Washington County and Clackamas County. I know great people in Washington County. I know great people in Clackamas County. My friends in Clackamas County would be the first to admit we just cannot serve an area the way a city can. So, for instance, McLaughlin economic, you know, promoting, you know, stronger nodes or promoting business success. Clackamas County, they have basically one full-time professional of economic development staff right now, who's wonderful. You represent, you know, 2% of the geography that she serves. She's going to give you 2 or 3 or 5% maybe of her time. She's not going to give you 50%. If you have a city, I think your ec dev person is going to be, I can't imagine he or she would be focused on anything other than McLaughlin 24/7. And same thing with your zoning people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Okay, I guess the other, I'm watching the time a little bit. So Eleanor, we have till 3 o'clock. Is that correct? Okay.
Till 1 o'clock. Till 1 o'clock, darling.
I'm teasing. I just wanted to talk a little bit about people because economic development, it's kind of as good as the people involved. And so I'll give you, I wrote down 3 examples of people. One is from history. The other 2 I know. But so the one from history is a guy named, hopefully some of you will know the name Angus Bomer. If you ever go down to Ashland, there's the Angus Bomer Theater. So he was, I think, a theater instructor at Southern Oregon College, is probably what it was at the time. And in the 30s, he had this idea, let's show some plays here. Let's show some Shakespeare here in Ashland. Who would have thought? That's a stupid idea. Why would you show Shakespeare in Ashland? It's 6 hours from Portland, 5 hours. Well, the way I drive, it's 4 hours. And I think they started with, if you look at it shows the seasons somewhere, they post it, and it's like the whatever 1935, whatever the first year, it lists like 4 performances, and then 36 there's 7 performances, and they actually brought in boxing matches to help make the thing pencil, because the Shakespeare was not going to pay for itself. So here's one person with a passion and a vision, and he got it started. And now I trust, if you haven't been to Ashland, you have to go, or I'll never talk to you again. I mean, it's one of the best Shakespeare festivals, and of course there's much more than Shakespeare. So that's one person. There's a guy named David Lawrence, personal friend. He was the ECDEV director for the city of Hillsborough, and he, in 1980 whatever, is talking to Intel. And they, again, some of you who know that have been around for a while, like me, the first Intel plant in Oregon was in Aloha, which is actually not in Hillsborough. Well, Intel wants to build a major facility, and if you've heard of Ronler Acres, it is by far the most successful urban renewal district in the history of the state of Oregon. And as an old Portland Development Commission guy, it pains me to say that, but it's true. And David was this creative risk taker. And if I don't have the time to tell you the whole Ronler Acres story, but if it hadn't been for David, maybe they would have figured it out. But this guy, there are hundreds, thousands of school teachers in Oregon who are paid their salary by Intel, so they have David Lawrence to thank. And you're not, I'm not saying you're going to get an Intel along McLaughlin Boulevard, but in terms of if you form a city, I said if you form a city, and honestly, I hope you do, get someone smart to say, all right, so and so, we want McLaughlin to respect what's there now, to respect the business owners there now, the property owners, certainly. If you don't, you're dead in the water, and that's not the right thing to do. But at the same time, we want this to be more than it is today. And by the way, I think these highways around this country, they are one of the great urban challenges that we face, is how do you take these auto-dominant places that are not generating the tax revenues because it's low improvement of land value ratio, and make them better places, people that are attractive, places that are attractive, so you can walk, so that Ed can walk down to the nearest intersection near him, the little node that has a nice coffee shop or a brew pub or whatever, a bookstore, things that I love, and so I think that's where I want to leave it. I have other notes here, but I could talk all day about this. I do want to stop there and respect your time. It's 12:40. I would love to challenge me. I encourage you. If you disagree, that's fine. But I'd love to dialogue a little bit if you're so inclined.
Great. Who's got a question? Anybody got a question? Edward's got a question.
I was wondering if you had any experience, John, in changing the attitudes, or what is effective in changing the attitudes of an area that would make them more receptive to having a city, so that these changes could occur. Like, does anything that have you seen that actually moves people better than others? Because I get, after talking with some people, that they say, it's fine, I don't care. And whereas other people, I've met this group of people here, are really kind of enthusiastic, of really trying to look in and see how we could make the area better. But a lot of people are sort of asleep in that respect. Have you had experiences where you've seen people kind of rise up and have an attitudinal change that could perhaps bring about that kind of change in attitude?
Yeah, I think if I lived in Oak Grove and I knew that there's this group that's looking at this governance possibility, i.e., possibly forming city, possibly becoming part of Milwaukee, I think I'd want to know what's in it for me. And I think what would persuade me, and I think I've seen other people persuaded, is enlightened self-interest. And again, you have more local autonomy, more control of your community. So what, let me think of an innocuous example. Well, um, let's say that you want to have safer crossings of McLaughlin for school kids, because I'm assuming some kids have to cross McLaughlin if they walk to school. And if you ask ODOT or Clackamas County, they'll say, well, we have a lot of territory that over which we have jurisdiction. So take a number. If you had a city with McLaughlin as your main spine, I think, you know, you could go to your city council and say, we demand, you know, perish the thought that if there's a death, and I pray that would never happen, but if there is, it's like, okay, city council, we need to do something about this. And this is, again, ODOT, there's good people there, there's good people in Clackamas County, they would care, but they'd also say, sorry, we got 400 other priorities. McLaughlin is going to be your priority. And since I see Thelma has raised her hand, I'll also mention I've had the pleasure of getting to know Thelma a little bit, but the trolley trail, there are stretches of it that I think need attention. So for instance, Gladstone, which is not a rich city, but they are positioning themselves, Portland Avenue, which is the main street of downtown Gladstone, they're positioning themselves to get federal funding to make Portland Avenue a more multimodal, have the trolley trail, have bike paths, have a wider sidewalk, and not just be a free-for-all for cars. And because Portland Avenue is the centerpiece of their downtown. So anyway, I'll shut up because Thelma has a question or observation.
Thelma, and then Kay Weaver next. Thelma?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. John, I haven't heard you address at all private property rights. There's nobody on this call that owns property on McLaughlin.
Yes, thank you, Thelma. That's a important question. And I think, again, in my career, redevelopment of an area is a partnership with private property owners, with business owners, with community members, agencies, in this case with ODOT. And I think maybe my best answer is just an example that comes immediately to mind from Tim Smith with Sarah Architects. He told the story, he was working on a plan in Kenton. If you know Kenton up in North Portland, Denver Avenue is a little bit like Portland Avenue, Gladstone. Is kind of a wide street, not terribly safe, not terribly pedestrian or bike friendly. So the community wanted to bring Denver Avenue, make it more pleasant. But Tim was told, well, the business owners are against that. Well, why? Well, I don't know. They're just against it. Well, okay. So there's this urban legend that there's just going to be a war about this street improvement. So Tim went and talked to the business owners and said, well, so what do you think about this? Well, we're concerned because we need to have loading access for our businesses. And so Tim worked with them and said, well, what if you had use of the street till whatever, 9 in the morning, I don't know what time, 9 a.m. The street is yours for loading and unloading. So, oh, well, that works. Okay. And I don't want to sound too Pollyanna-ish and naive, but I think if I were the ECDEP person, I'd be talking to these businesses of property owners and say, here's what I'm hearing from the community. What do you think? And I can come up with several thoughts of how to have a more nuanced zoning code that would respect private property rights, but also help the community achieve its goals for that street. And you're only going to get it, as far as I can tell, if you form a city.
So Kay Weaver's up, and then Tom Civiletti, and then Gwen. Kay?
John, I wonder if you could speak about what happened in Lake Oswego. I assume that the main street going through there was part of ODOT, but it's certainly been beautified. And how did they get to the position that they're in now?
Yeah, well, I am familiar with Lake Oswego. They have used their zoning regulations and their urban renewal tool to make downtown Lake Oswego, there's been a lot of improvement. I am not sure. You're right. Highway 43 is a state right of way. I'm assuming it is still a state right of way. The state does have a program in discrete areas. I think this is the case in Milwaukee as well, where there's something like a kind of an exception where, as you know, in both downtown Milwaukee and downtown Oregon City and downtown Lake Oswego, 99 and 43, you have to slow down. And I have the tickets from Milwaukee to prove it. I didn't, when they first installed that thing, I didn't see the photo radar, so I helped pay for it. But it's 30 miles an hour in Milwaukee and in downtown Oregon City. And in Lake Oswego, it's 25. And so even if it's a right of way, there's ways to do it. I don't think you could tell ODOT, we want X miles of McLaughlin to be 30 miles an hour. It may not even make sense to make it 30 miles an hour, but again, if you have local control, that's how you have more thwack with ODOT to get improvements, to require trees, to have more crossings, and come up with a plan to pay for it. Once again, I'm throwing out ideas. This is for you all to decide. Do you want to see more crossing, more lights? Do you want to see trees? Do you want to see wider sidewalks? Do you want to see traditional ornamental lighting? If you don't, then go for it. But I think it's going to be really hard to get it without some change in your governance. And again, that's what I'm hearing from my friends at Clackamas County. They get it, but they don't have the bandwidth or the resources to do that. You would if you were a city.
Tom Soletti. And then Mark.
Yeah, thanks. John, you expressed some reluctance to talk about transit, but I want to push you on that by asking, why do you think that development around the Park Place station has lagged so far behind development in areas around other stations on light rail transit?
Okay, that's a great question, and I did not mean to imply. I've worked on the interstate. I've worked on the Central City streetcar. I worked in the West Side light rail line. So I'm a supporter of transit, and I think one of its benefits it helps to create better urban form, more walkability, more mixed use. Again, you look at Beaverton, and it's amazing. Transit has been a major component of that. To answer your question, I think I know a lot of people, including some people on this call, have spent a lot of time trying to figure out Park Avenue. I believe that the current zoning, and Chips or someone can tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think it really allows that kind of development that, for instance, we're seeing on interstate. When I started working on interstate in 1999, the idea of multi-story mixed-use development, like, you're kidding, it's not going to happen here. Go up to interstate, and so it's an old state highway. It's the old Highway 99, I think, 99W, and there's a bunch of old motels and drive-through businesses and all that. It's amazing its transformation through a combination of the light rail investment. The zoning was aligned to fit that vision. We formed an urban renewal area. That's how I got involved. I was with PDC at the time, Portland Development Commission. So you had this combination of incentives, policy, infrastructure investment, that sort of that three-legged stool, which attracted developers. By the way, I haven't said anything about this. One of the things, this is another stating the obvious, but in my work, if you want redevelopment, like, I'll just give an example of the Axle Tree in downtown Milwaukee, which I think is a nice project, and I know the developers. I would the first thing I do is talk to those developers. I'd certainly talk to existing property owners and business owners in the community, but I'd also say, all right, Mr. or Ms. Developer, the project you did in Lentz or in Interstate or in Milwaukee, downtown Milwaukee, we want to see that sort of thing here at Park Avenue. What will it take? And he or she will probably tell you, okay, I need incentives, I need investment, because it won't pencil today. I need the zoning to even allow it. And I'm 99% sure the zoning doesn't come close to allowing it because of the cap on residential density. Yeah, the policy, the zoning, the regulatory, the incentives, and the infrastructure. You have the infrastructure investment, you have light rail, that should be attracting that quality of development that creates more walkability, creates more economic activity. But the zoning, I think, prohibits it.
Mark Guian?
Hi, John, in my work, when I run into economic development, it's usually on a global level, and it's pretty indistinguishable from colonialism. It's like how you go in and incorporate a country into the whole global economy. And so when I hear you talk about this great victory of Intel and Hillsborough, and so Hillsborough is now a company town, totally dependent on this multinational corporation. That makes me a little frightened. So I'm wondering if there are any mechanisms by which we can have economic development that will actually help the area itself. That is, you talk about even small companies, great. But are small companies are by people who live in the area? Are they hiring people who are in the area? I mean, in a place like this, you can have a big company here, but everybody who works there would come in from other places, and all the money that's generated would go off to Texas or Singapore or someplace. Are there mechanisms for having an actual local economy that will support itself?
Yeah, that I appreciate that question, and Intel, I only threw that out to say that a city, whatever its economic vision, now, was that the right vision for Hillsborough to have? We could debate that. The point is that a city can control its fate much more than a small portion of a county. I think that I can't imagine if I were the ECDev director for the city of Oak Grove, my focus would be on the existing businesses and then identifying the regulations and the incentives to help them be successful. So I'll use Interstate one example. The light rail line, needless to say, that construction interrupts business. And so we had a bunch of nervous businesses. To her great credit, Mayor Katz said that she doesn't want a single business to close because of the light rail construction. And we achieved it through a variety of measures. One of them was we worked with a local nonprofit financial institution, Cascadia Revolving Fund. And we used some of our dollars to help write down the interest rate. So we said, all right, small business X, you'll get a loan at a very low interest rate, but no payments for a year. So, and a number of businesses took advantage of this, and they got they got a loan of X thousand dollars to sustain them during the X months when the construction made it really difficult for their customers to get there. Then a year later, the construction had moved on. Now they're getting their customers back in. And so now they're getting revenue. They could pay off that loan over flexible terms. And is that what you need on McLaughlin? I don't know. The point is you get creative people to work with the businesses. What do you need? We need a short-term cash infusion because of the interstate light rail line. Okay, let's go talk to Cascadia, and we set up this program. There'll probably be different solutions for you, but Mark, I respect that observation. And actually, my career, I'm not the Intel guy. I'm not the Solar World guy. I'm the downtown Hillsborough guy. How do we help small businesses in downtown Hillsborough be successful and thrive? So I think my heart is with you on where the focus of my economic development work has been.
And Valerie?
I just have a quick question. And some of what you were talking about, John, you made the comment about the tax base that you think is being generated right now by McLaughlin Boulevard not being high. Can you expand on that? I've heard differing things about what the businesses that are there now generate.
Yeah, this is just a broad impression. I certainly don't have the facts. It's probably worth knowing, but if you had new mixed use development along McLaughlin, new commercial investment, a bank relocates its offices to McLaughlin, whatever it is, obviously the increased value is going to generate more taxes. And so without, I don't think necessarily or even likely generating more, incurring more costs, of the cost of the services. So if I'm a city and I have a property that's worth $1 million and is paying taxes based on $1 million, now there's a new I'll use my example. A local bank builds its headquarters. It's worth $5 million. I'm taking more taxes. I'm really not incurring more service costs. That's a net gain to my city.
So I've got a question, and maybe this will wrap things up. I'm always fascinated. It seems like there's this divide between personal property rights of business owners on McLaughlin and the rest of the community. And in my mind, maybe it's just too simplistic, but it seems to me that the two are integrated. And if the businesses on McLaughlin had more interrelationship, I would love to spend my money in my community, but there aren't businesses that I want to spend my money on. So it's one of these things of like, how can that seeming schism come back together? And what I'm hearing you say, John, is that if there was more nuance available, right, which at the county level, county governance level, it just isn't. But if there's more nuance available, then there could be a greater interrelationship and recognition of the interdependence and economic generativity and benefit for both businesses and residents together.
Yeah, I mean, I always, and I know Eleanor, you agree, dialogue in a personal relationship, but also in this kind of relationship between a community, a residential community and its business community, dialogue is always good. There may be some areas of disagreement that are going to be hard to fix, and we're never going to get to perfect. But my example of Tim Smith up in Kenton, when he simply talked to the business owner, said, "Here's our problem," it was an easy fix. And I could think of, I gather that one of the concerns is non-conforming uses. If I had a business that wouldn't be allowed under a new set of zoning regulations, I'd be concerned. Well, there are things that cities could do to address that, to tweak their grandfather rights for that business, so it is less perceived risk of being closed down someday. There's I don't want to get into the weeds. The point is, a city can have that dialogue much easier than the county. I just don't think the county's going to, we'll set up this particular very narrow, tailored, nuanced set of regulations for non-conforming businesses here. They're not going to do it, because then they'd have to apply it countywide. The city can be much more attentive. I hope I'm making that point clear, because I really believe that there is room for strengthening the harmony between communities' goals for McLaughlin and business needs. I really believe that, because I've seen it in a number of settings.
Right, exactly. We're us. It's not us and them. It's all together. All right. Well, it's just a little bit after 1 o'clock. I want to thank everyone so much for being here. If you notice in the chat is the link to join the Oak Lodge Governance Project MailChimp account, so that you will get notices. If you haven't already done that, please do, because we're going to stop using the old email list and just go to the MailChimp list. We're segueing off into that. And anything else from any other steering committee members that I've forgotten to mention? Nope, I'm hearing a no. So thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, your weekend. Stay cool. John, thank you enormously for your presence and your wisdom and all your various thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
questions too. Great questions. Thank you.
Look forward to keeping the conversation going.
Yep,
Thank you all so
definitely.
much. All right.
Definitely.
Bye-bye. Goodbye, everyone.